It's a pleasure to be here, and I just should start by saying that my views represent my own views and not necessarily those of the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission or my fellow commissioners. I think the key takeaway is that we as regulators need to have an open mind toward innovation, and we need to have an open mind toward people who are thinking creatively about solving problems. And so at the SEC, we've taken one approach, but at that conference yesterday, we were able to hear from a number of other countries about how they're approaching blockchain and digital assets more generally. And I think it was a really productive discussion and shows that we all have a lot to learn from each other on this issue. Well, I think that we need to, and so that's what I'm hoping that we will do. We've spent a lot of time over the last few years trying to learn more about crypto and blockchain, and I think the benefit of that learning will ultimately translate into a little more clarity, but it is a pretty slow process. I think we're still trying to get our hands around get our arms around certain aspects of um, how the law applies in this area, and how it should apply in this area. So I will continue pushing for clarity, but it may take a little time yet. I think that those two things aren't necessarily inconsistent, right? So we want to build strong markets in the United States because that increases prosperity, which in turn helps people, and that's what we ultimately want. We want people's lives to be better. So I think that we can do that on the one hand, but a piece of that is just being open to innovation. Our country has always been one where people with great ideas have come to develop companies to build those ideas up. And so I'd like it to also to be a country where people come and have great ideas in the digital asset space and build their digital asset projects in the US too. And obviously one of the benefits of this kind of technology is that it connects people from all across the world. So you can have people in the US and you can have people elsewhere, but we certainly don't want people to feel they have to go offshore to put one of those projects in place. Yeah, I mean, again, it's something that I'm concerned about because I've talked to a number of people who are developing projects elsewhere, and they've said we'd love to be in the US, but we feel that we can't because of the regulatory uncertainty. And so I think that's the best thing that we can do is provide more certainty. Now, I will say that we have taken some steps to be more open to talking with people about what they're working on. And so we have, for example, peer-to-peer sessions that we run in different cities of the US. People can come and talk to the staff who are working directly on these issues. And so I think things like that can make people more comfortable that they actually can go into the SEC and ask questions. You know, tell the SEC what they're planning to do and ask maybe some guidance about which direction to look. And so I think that will be helpful in drawing some of these people back. But I think ultimately it's going to be the regulatory clarity that will draw people back to the US. Well, it's difficult because there are a number of different areas in which clarity is needed. But I always caution people that a big agency like the SEC, any government agency that has existed for a long time and has lots of rules on the books, it can take a really long time to amend those rules and to provide some new clarity. And one thing that I think a lot of people in this community don't realize is that the SEC does lots of different things. And so we've got a pretty packed agenda. And so it's sometimes hard to find time on the agenda even if you have a rule ready to go, to get that rule finalized. No, but I think it's good that we're getting pushed a little bit too, because sometimes we can be too slow, and that's been a criticism of mine, that innovation is happening, and so the timeline is, people want to move forward, and so you need some more guidance to be able to move forward. So I'm sensitive to that, and I'm working on pushing us forward. There is a lot of intergovernmental communication, and it's about lots of issues, but this is one of the issues that people are talking about. I think, again, it's a little tricky because some of the questions in this area are about which jurisdiction, what are digital assets and which jurisdiction do they fit within. And so it makes it really important for us to keep talking to each other. So I, for example, talk a lot with one of my fellow commissioners at the CFTC, and we talk about a range of issues, but this is one of the issues that we talk about. Well, I'm impressed that you all were aware of the fact that he's leaving. He's been a very hardworking staffer, and we're sad to see him go. But it's very common for staffers to leave and decide to go and work at a law firm, or I don't know what actually he's doing when he leaves, but that's very normal. So in terms of what it means for enforcement actions in this area, which is an area that he's concentrated on, someone else will step in. And so to the extent that there's still enforcement actions, there'll still be enforcement actions. Um, I think we've been pretty clear in this area that if there's fraud, we're going to go after it. And we've also made it clear that we're going after unregistered offerings. And so I think you should expect that those kinds of enforcement actions will continue as they have. Now, I understand that there's often a lot of uncertainty about the enforcement side, and my point of view is that we really need to be proactive, as you mentioned earlier, in providing clear rules and guidance so that people know what it is they have to comply with, and then we can hold them accountable for not complying with it. So, it's interesting when people ask me questions like that, because I always say, look, I'm a regulator, I'm not an innovator. And so I have ideas about where things might go, but I trust much more the sort of insights of people who are actually working on this technology, and about its potential, assessing its potential. But I think the role for a regulator is to say, we need to make sure that people can try these things. And if they succeed, that's going to be because they had a good idea, not because, and if they fail, it's because they had a bad idea, not because the regulation stood in its way. And so that's what I really want to do, is kind of open the doors and make sure that we have a level playing field so that people can put stuff out there, and then we'll see what works. And that's really exciting. And I think that's what excites me about this space, which is you've got a lot of people who have really interesting ideas about how the future might be different than the present, and they're trying to get those ideas into place to see how they work. Yeah, I can't share any inside information about what might happen, but I think we'll continue working on these issues. I think the staff is going to continue to engage actively with people. I encourage people to come talk to us, come tell us what you're doing. If you think we don't understand something, if you think we've gotten something wrong, come talk to us. You can come talk to me. You can talk to people on the staff. And I think that will help us move forward. That's an interesting idea. Um, we do try to think of creative ways to do outreach. And so um, I think the peer-to-peer events that we're doing and the speaking that the staff who are working specifically on this issue, the staff in our FinHub are doing, I think those are attempts to be a little bit of an SEC Academy. I like that. I like that description of it, though. That name is good. Well, we do a lot of education efforts on lots of other things, like investor education efforts, but we're always thinking about ways to reach out. And I think one thing that this whole crypto space has taught me is that a lot of people just have no idea what the SEC is. And so sometimes getting out there just to explain what it is and what rules might apply to a particular space can be helpful. So I think that's a great suggestion.
Thank you. And thank you very much, Hester.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.